please dumb down for me an explanation of how this land was bought by the federal government, and yet the people that it was bought from are still there?
Okay, first of all, in order to get the legislation moving against the opposition of the ranchers, the Park Service decided to give up its condemnation power as long as ranchers just kept ranching and didn't sell to a subdivider, which was going on or beginning out there. So the law got passed with the limitation that the Park Service couldn't condemn the ranches so long as they kept ranching. They could remain. However, some ranchers started selling to the Park Service, and the Park Service was giving them leasebacks of some kind where they could stay for another 20 or whatever years. And more ranchers liked that, and so there began this process where ranchers started selling to the Park Service. The Park Service would give them the right to stay for 20 or whatever years. Ultimately, what happened is those leases started to expire, and John Sansing, who was the superintendent from the early 70s, I think, until the mid-90s, he decided to keep giving them more leases of shorter duration than their original ones. That should not have happened. That should have been the time that the park should have stopped and said, we need to make a decision on whether ranching should continue or whether these lands should be used as parks are meant to be used. He did not do that. That was a violation of NEPA, in my opinion. He did at that time come out with a general management plan of 1980, which was required by the general management plan statute that provided for these things, that was passed just a couple of years before, or a few years before, I don't know the exact amount of time. But it was basically just a cookie cutter, slam bam document that really had no discussion, not much public input, no discussion about whether ranching should continue. Even though all the ranches were acquired by then, it should have had that in it. But he sidestepped normal Park Service process, policies, and the law.
If an environmental impact statement had been conducted prior to the expiration of the ranching leases, do you think that might have affected the decision about whether or not to renew leases?
Well, it would have put us basically where we are right now. The question would have been, should ranching continue? And that's the question that's before the Park Service right now. I think both then, and I'm afraid to say now, the pressure from the ranching industry to keep using the national park land for ranching and not public recreation and protection of resources would have then been pursued. We would have had more ranching, and maybe litigation would have occurred then. Who knows? I mean, we're just speculating, but nothing was done NEPA-wise at the time.
My understanding is that the current estimates of how many cows out there are conservative.
Well, the administrative record during the litigation showed that one rancher, Kevin Lunny, was being investigated for having too many cattle under his permit or license or lease, but the Park Service never did anything of it, and I don't know what the facts were then. I don't think that there's ever been a time when conditions were better than they are now out there, except prior to ranching, which began long before the seashore was established.
That's pretty scary, considering that right now Point Reyes National Seashore is one of the top 10 crappiest places in the nation.
Yes, it's Keogh Creek is, the Park Service did a 2013 study that included water resources in Point Reyes and I believe Golden Gate Recreation Area. And I remember a passage in that water pollution study that said that Keogh Creek was severely polluted, as were other places in the seashore. And it specifically mentioned, in fact, the 3 dairies that contribute manure to Keogh Creek, namely the L Ranch, the I Ranch, and the J Ranch, and also the beef cattle ranch, the K Ranch, as all contributing through their cattle's manure to the pollution of Keogh Creek.
Can we focus on the word unimpaired for a while?
Sure.
Absolutely nothing about what I'm seeing out there strikes me as this beautiful gem on our coast being unimpaired.
The area became impaired when ranching began, and as the Park Service generally and its statute for Point Reyes mention, parks are, if they're not at their level of being in optimum natural condition, the Park Service is supposed to restore quote unquote them to that pristine natural condition.
I'm going to read something to you that I found online. You may have even sent this to me, I can't remember. But this was when the government was in a stalemate or shutdown recently. And in an explanatory statement by House Appropriations Committee was this language hidden on page 324 of a 609-page document regarding Point Reyes. The conferencees note that multi-generational ranching and dairying is important both ecologically and economically for the Point Reyes National Seashore and the surrounding community. These historic activities are also fully consistent with Congress's intent for the management of Point Reyes National Seashore. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't know. I think I lost track of what I was trying to remember if I had seen that language before. I think I had, and it might have been in a House or Senate appropriations report on an appropriation bill that ultimately was passed several months ago for this current fiscal year. And I disagree with the words.
What's the political strategy of including words like that in a document?
To try to support ranching, to give it some basis for ranching to continue. I don't see, and this is just me based on being a lawyer and having been out there maybe 150 times since 2010 or so, you cannot have ranching, at least ranching as it is conducted today, or basically any ranching other than ranching that would be for purposes of showcasing how ranching can be conducted to be consistent with not hurting natural resources. You just can't have ranching and have natural resources being in basically the condition they were in before man's use of the land damaged them. The two are mutually exclusive.